Hello and welcome to Morning Coffee
and Maestros.
In today's episode, we'll be talking with my jet-setting maestro and friend, Marc Taddei. Marc is the music director of New Zealand's Orchestra Wellington and California's Vallejo Symphony Orchestra. With Marc in New Zealand and with Jamal and I in Florida, we're calling this program Worlds Apart.
And while we are worlds apart geographically, we are also worlds apart in our response to COVID-19 pandemic. While much of the performing arts in America has fallen silent, New Zealand is giving voice to a renaissance of concerts with full houses. Marc has also a Sarasota connections, as his parents have lived here for many years and has traveled here from New Zealand this past June, so he has more of a unique perspective to share.
But before we meet Maestro Marc Taddei, Chorale has a busy month in store, and this month, October, you have a lot of opportunities to see some of the great things we've been doing, including 2 online concerts, and also to be part of our Come Together Choir online choral rehearsals, Volume 2. And we've been having a great time with our Come Together Choir. We've had hundreds of singers from all over the country and even around the world join us for these great rehearsals. It's music from the American folk time of the 50s and 60s. And it's just great music of Peter, Paul, and Mary, and Pete Seeger, all that great music, and it's really fun. So if you're hearing about this for the first time, don't worry. You can go onto our website and register to get music for these episodes. Go to our YouTube channel, and you can start with episode 1 and catch right up with us. So it's going to be great fun, so we hope you'll be part of the Come Together Choir Online Choral Rehearsals Volume 2.
With all of the civil unrest that's been happening in our country, the racial divide, Chorale truly has a hammer of justice and a hammer of freedom to offer to all of those in our community and beyond. On October 30th at 7:30 p.m., we will present a virtual concert called Together We Rise, celebrating the resiliency of the human spirit. It'll be a concert of great classic works and Negro spirituals and all different forms of choral music, just to bring peace to the human heart that is sometimes only the way music can.
And I think you'll even hear a solo by Jamal, I believe. Is that true?
That's very true.
That is true. And we're also excited about our encore presentation of American Roots, The Gospel Experience. The Gospel Experience is a collaboration from last season of Chorale and West Coast Black Theater Troupe, exploring the rich tradition of Black gospel music in America. This is a high-energy show celebrating the deeply emotional music and movement at the heart of African-American worship. And you can purchase your ticket for only $25 per household, and you have all month to do it. So until November 1, you can enjoy the incredible gospel experience. And that has some solos, too, from Jamal.
It does.
I know. There are some great performances from our chamber singers, Jamal, Amy Jo Connors, and incredible performers of West Coast Black Theater Troupe. So we hope you'll take advantage of some of this great content this month in October. And we're excited to introduce our new guest. So I'm going to turn it over to Jamal.
So today's episode is a first. We are thrilled to add a third maestro to our show. I don't know if that's a good or a bad thing, but let's welcome Marc Taddei. Hello, Marc.
Hi, Jamal. How are you doing?
I'm great. It's good to have you.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes. Let me tell you guys a little bit about this talented conductor. Marc has been celebrated for his magnificent contribution as music director by the press and lauded as a real interpreter of boldly romantic inclinations by the Dominion Post. Conductor Marc Taddei was appointed music director of Orchestra Wellington in 2007 and music director of the Vallejo Symphony Orchestra in 2016. He previously served as music director of the Christchurch Symphony Orchestra. Marc frequently conducts every professional orchestra in Australia and New Zealand, often working with the National Ballet and opera companies. He made his mainline China debut in 2014 and debuted with the Hong Kong Philharmonic shortly afterwards. His impressive discography includes nearly 30 recordings of eclectic and significant repertoire on the Sony, BMG, Coke, Columbia, Trust, ASV, Universal, Rattle, Concordance, Kiwi, Pacific labels, and many of his discs are featured in streaming audio on the Naxos Music Library website. He now divides his time between Wanaka, Wellington, and San Francisco when not on the road to other destinations in Australia, and Asia. And I like to just say, for every conductor out there, we are jealous.
We're jealous. So it's great to have you with us, Mark. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Joe. It's always wonderful to see you.
I know we don't get to see each other often. I just am amazed. I think what you need is maybe a few more record labels, maybe just 2 or 3 more to the list.
I know it's a pretty ungainly sentence, isn't it? It probably needs a couple of periods or something, but it is what it is, Joe.
It's an impressive list, though.
It is.
Yeah, I mean, it's just the way these things go. You get opportunities and you grab them, and you try to make the best of it. Being a music director, it gives you a chance to influence ideas or projects, and so some of those CDs have come about because of projects that I initiated. And in fact, I've got a Barber violin and cello concerto CD that's in production right now. A wonderful a CD of coloratura arias by a soprano area, Shawnette Salker, which will be coming out next season, next year, I should say. So yeah, it's just a matter of being in the right place at the right time, and also being able to influence people to say, hey, this CD might be a good idea.
I have to say that we met it back in 2006, and I think that was one of those times of being in the right place in the right time, at least for me. I was the associate conductor and the director of courses for the Southwest Florida Symphony in Fort Myers, Florida, and we were in the middle of a music director search, and we had our 5 finalists, and Mark was the first of the 5 finalists, and he did a concert. I think it was the Bartok Concerto for Orchestra, and we also did a short piece by Dvorak for choir and orchestra and solos called the Te Deum, which was really great. And so it was really an opportunity to really kind of meet him. And I think the first time Mark and I met, we really shared a lot of common interests, certainly a love of great wine and great music. And we don't take ourselves nearly as seriously as we do our music and our wine. I think that's a true statement. Yeah. Although I think your wine rack looks a lot better than mine.
Yeah, well.
But we had a great time with that experience. And I know when you came to Florida, it was you just did such a great job. We just hit it off immediately. And I think the progress the orchestra made in that short amount of time was really impressive, and the concert was great. So tell us a little bit about that experience.
Well, I have nothing but the fondest memories of the Southwest Florida Symphony Orchestra. An excellent orchestra. I love the community. And I'm sad. It was the first conductor search I was involved with. Of course, I was disappointed not to get the job. My parents lived in Sarasota at the time, so there was that familial connection. But actually, one of the things that I do regret about not being successful was the fact that I didn't get a chance to spend more time with you, Joe, and also your wife, Michelle. Because you're wonderful people, and in fact, the first rehearsal I attended for this week for the concert wasn't in fact something that I conducted. It was a choral rehearsal that you took, and I was struck immediately by your approach and the entire choir approach. It was intentionally collegial. Everyone was focused on a common goal. It was really, really friendly and very, very serious. And the expression of music was always at the forefront of what you did. And I saw that as magnanimous leadership from you, and in terms of creating an environment that allowed people to feel empowered to sort of contribute to the process, but also you were able to keep things into a tight rein. So I have to say, it's vivid in my memory. It was one of the best rehearsals I had ever attended. So yeah, thank you, Joe.
Well, I tell you, we definitely hit it off, and I thought, when you think about coming to an orchestra you don't know, and doing the Bartok Concerto for Orchestra, which has all of this amazing playing, a lot of solos, and I think the same thing I saw from you is a way of bringing the orchestra along, and you're hearing that orchestra for the first time and trying to wield an interpretation and also learn the strengths and weaknesses of the orchestra. So I wonder, you do a lot of guest conducting, but I wonder coming into that experience, especially as a candidate with such a difficult piece, how much of a challenge was that?
Well, that's a very good question. So basically, I take the view that, I mean, you have to put the fact that you're being assessed. I mean, conductors, whenever they come into an orchestra, or even if they've been in with an orchestra for 20 years, they're always being assessed anyway.
True.
But so you have to put this out of your mind. I think you just have to do your job. And coming into a new orchestra, absolutely, there's a period of you have your conception of the interpretation in your mind, but you have to listen to what the orchestra gives back. Many orchestras, great orchestras, will have a huge tradition of musical standards and or musical expression, and a conductor would be a fool not to go with that kind of thing. So there's a sense of a conductor shouldn't necessarily come in with a totally rigid interpretation, but rather come in much the way that you demonstrated in this rehearsal, one of intense collegiality, trying to work out how we can come to a destination with a common purpose. This reminds me of a fantastic anecdote. Simon Rattle was conducting the Berlin Philharmonic, and at one point he said, well, normally now is a time when I ask the orchestra to think like they're the Berlin Philharmonic and approach the way they would, but I don't really know what to say to you.
I've never heard.
It's a fantastic thing. So there's so many different ways of approaching rehearsals, but I think I'm verbose. I'm sorry, too much, but I think that the number one thing that I try to do is listen.
And that's good advice.
Yeah, listen to what they're giving you, and quickly deduce how far you're going to be able to push your musical agenda, your musical ideas. So that first rehearsal is very, very important, and then it's back to the drawing board. You have to work out how are you going to structure the rest of the rehearsal process to get the best bang for the buck.
So, Mark, you are kind of at the precipice of this renaissance of bringing the orchestra back to the hall, not just in a virtual world, but with actual audience. So, how has your approach to programming changed, or maybe just stayed the same with approaching a COVID-19 world?
Okay. Well, it's a good question, and the nature of my reality is rather different than my colleagues in Europe and America, in that New Zealand took a very structured approach to dealing with the pandemic. They have a 4-tiered response system, alert system, level 1 through level 4. So level 0 would be the borders are open, life is normal. Level 1 is essentially life is normal, but we're on guard and the borders are closed. And any national that comes home will have to spend 2 weeks in government mandated quarantine. And then it goes up to level 4, which is essentially a very, very soft martial law. I mean, that's probably a bit strong, but basically you're confined to quarters, you're confined to your immediate bubble of family or flatmates or what have you. So my response throughout this period from the beginning of the pandemic to now has changed quite a bit. In the beginning, we weren't able to do concerts, but there was the glimmer of hope that our response would bring the pandemic under control, which it did. So we came up with ideas for socially distanced concerts, or possibilities of, if we were able to have 500 in the hall, how could we afford to do this kind of thing? So for instance, I came up with this idea entitled Circle of Friends, which was dealing with the Robert Schumann's Circle of Friends. And I proposed a 6-concert series of this. They were all about 1 hour and 15 minutes long, no interval, and we would have 500 people in the hall, and we repeat the concert 3 times, so fit 2,000 people. And we were able to make that work budget-wise the same way as we would with our Great and Noble season, which is our current season, based on the music of Rachmaninoff. Another idea was taking our Great and Noble season and reducing it so that we didn't have to do quite so much rehearsal and have a, as I said, a one part, no interval program. And there was that idea. But in the end, we were able to get down to level 1, and we've just gone ahead with the program as originally advertised, except we had to postpone. And it's been a bit touch and go. So I got back from a visit to my family in June. And 4 days after I got out of quarantine, I began first rehearsals for a community project, and then a postponed concert, which was Tchaikovsky's Manfred Symphony and Rachmaninoff's Third Piano Concerto, which sold very, very well. And then I was meant to have another concert about 3 weeks later, two or 3 weeks later. But in that intervening 2 or 3 weeks, there was a cluster that was discovered in Auckland, and that brought the entire country back into level 2, which meant that we couldn't have gatherings of more than 100 people, which of course is just totally uneconomic for an orchestra. So we had to postpone. Now I've just completed a concert with Orchestra Wellington last night. We did the Tchaikovsky Serenade, a work by John Pasakis, who's a world-renowned composer, a piano concerto entitled Three Psalms, and then the symphonic dances of Sergei Rachmaninoff to a crowd of 2,100 people, which I'm totally delighted by. And the concert went very, very well. But we had postponed so many concerts that we only had one date left. So this next month, the next 4 weeks, we have concerts in every single week. And I just want to get them done with, so that otherwise, if we have to postpone again, we only have one date left, and then we're going to have to start canceling concerts. And I want to be in a position to trumpet the idea that Orchestra Wellington may be the only orchestra in the world that's able to present the 2020 season as originally advertised, albeit in a different order.
Yeah, I think you're going to be we're hoping for it. We're hoping for you, because I think seeing what you guys are doing is really giving really around the world hope that we're gonna get to the point where we can get back to doing what we do, which is doing these great concerts with full houses of people who love to hear what they're hearing.
And Joe, it is going to happen. So my experience, of course, when I looked out with the Manfred concert at the hall, it was just a sea of humanity, and I thought, wow, this feels a bit dangerous. But in fact, it was, because there was no COVID in the country at that point. But so there's a need for people to come as a community to listen to great art. And this real sense of a two-way conversation three-way conversation between the creator, that is the composer, the musicians, and then the interpreter of the work, who are, of course, the audience. I think all three aspects of this relationship are important, and that's what makes live music so very, very, very important. But then looking back in the 19th century, there was the great cholera epidemic. And also 100 years ago, we had the Spanish flu. What is interesting from my reading is concerts rebounded incredibly quickly. So I think it's going to be precisely the same in Europe and America. Once a vaccine is discovered, once we're back, once the vaccines come in, I have no doubt that people will be hungering for this sense of community, this sense of artistic fulfillment, this sense of, quite frankly, highbrow entertainment that only classical music can bring. It's kind of a secular church community feel in a way. And I think there's something quite profound about attending a classical concert. So, look, in New Zealand, thanks to good governance, empathetic leadership, listening to our leaders, and taking a very hard, fast stance in the beginning of the pandemic, we're reaping the rewards. But I have no doubt that when the vaccines developed, things are going to come back with a vengeance. And in fact, the arts are going to have a huge influx of popularity. Certainly that's the case here. Orchestra Wellington has enjoyed really great popularity in New Zealand. But this year, knock wood, thus far, and hopefully it can continue, our numbers are just crazy. So for instance, last year, our average concert house was 1850. And currently we're over 2,000. So I'll take it.
Exactly.
Is the New Zealand population, a lot more interested in classical music than you have experienced in America?
I don't think so. People talk about sort of regional differences, and even in New Zealand, when I was music director in Christchurch, I worked with Auckland a lot as a title conductor, New Zealand Symphony, what have you. I actually think audiences are the same. They hunger for concerts. They might be by nature slightly conservative. Like sometimes we fear what we don't know.
Right.
And I think part of the job of an arts institution, and specifically a music director, if you're a music director, you're entrusted with programming, you're entrusted with the health of an orchestra, the artistic direction of the orchestra, but you're also entrusted with being the conduit between the institution and the public. How do you sort of spread the joy of music? How do you get people sort of involved and interested and turned on by music that they might not have already heard? And that's the challenge. And the way that I've had success has been thematic programming, having programming that's tightly tied to marketing. And marketing is kind of a dirty word amongst artists, but in fact, if the programming is thought of with marketing at the same time, it doesn't become a marketing driven exercise. Rather, it becomes an artistic exercise. And if you have a concept like, for instance, The Great Romantic, we're doing a series of all the symphonies of Rachmaninoff, things like that. Obviously, you're going to be doing the Second Symphony, the symphonic dances, works that are well known, but then you're doing the First and Third Symphonies that aren't played often enough. And quite frankly, the end of the first movement of the symphonic dances quotes the first theme of the first movement of the Rachmaninoff First Symphony, which is a total disaster because the conductor, the Glazunov, was totally off his head on vodka. And he couldn't conduct. He couldn't conduct electricity. So in 1942 or 3, when this work was premiered by Ormandy and the Philadelphia Orchestra, no one had heard the First Symphony for 50 years. So this was his sense, I think, of saying, this work, there's a lot of beauty in it. And I think this was just him bringing back a remembrance of a work that he, actually turned into a terrible mental anguish for him that was only relieved by the premiere of his second piano concerto, after mental therapy in Switzerland. I'm going off topic now.
I kind of, what I love about Mark, what you're programming is it's very much like you. It's very unique, and it has that really connection with marketing, which I think, we share that idea of, we want to do great music. Also, we want to make sure people come to it. And so part of times it's the way we package it, but I don't think we have to package it in a way that dumbs down the music or the idea. I think quite the reverse. And I love so many of the programs you do and the way you present them. And I think it's not only for you, it's not just one concert, it's how that one concert is in relationship to the entire season.
Exactly right. And, and so many layers to it. We take the audience on a journey, but in fact, especially in the case of cycles, you take the orchestra on a journey. So, for instance, this year, they will have had their fill of Rachmaninoff. We did a Dvorak cycle before. We did a season called The Impresario, where we dealt with the great ballet scores of the Ballet Russe, Sergei Diaghilev, which is slightly different because there's so many different composers. But it gives a sense of the milieu, the artistic milieu. How does one approach Beethoven or Brahms or Tchaikovsky or Mozart? They all demand different kinds of interpretive quality, and to give a huge sort of season totally devoted to one composer or one style is great for the orchestra as much as it is great for audience appeal.
And you were talking before about musical expression is it's part of the one of the players in this is the orchestra itself, yourself, the audience, but the other one is the hall itself. And I know you guys play in what looks like an exceptionally beautiful, gorgeous hall, and I love the way when there's no chorus, you can just wrap around the orchestra, and it's just tell us a little bit about that particular amazing space that you play in.
Okay, right. So it's kind of oval shaped, and there's seats right around the orchestra. Though if we're doing a Carmina Burana or something like that, it'll be more of a horseshoe shape for the audience because we have the choir and the choir stalls. It's a very good modern hall. It looks a little bit like an upended colander from the outside. It's called the Michael Fowler Center. It fits roughly 2,300 people, though a number of those seats are essentially unsellable because there are some sightline issues. As far as modern halls go, it's very, very good. It's a little patchy in places, but the best seats are really great in terms of acoustics. From a performance point of view, we can hear each other very, very clearly on the hall. And even if you're socially distanced or there's no one in the hall always gives back, kind of a proper concert hall aura and acoustic around it. When we have 2,200 people in the hall, it's a little more dead, but it still has that sense of bloom that a good hall can provide. It's very comfortable. We have a really large front of house, so we can do big pre-concert talks. I get about 500 people to the pre-concert talks, which is just absolutely extraordinary.
Yeah.
We have bars and ice creams at interval, that kind of thing. So it's it's all very, very civilized.
You mentioned the pre-concert talks, and I wondered maybe it might be nice for you to tell us about the pre-concert talks that you're doing with conversations with composers. Tell us a little about that outreach.
Okay, so when we went into the level 4 lockdown, my general manager said, why don't we have an online presence with you doing pre-concert talks? It's just so to keep people interested. And I said, okay, this is a great idea, but I didn't want to do it live. And I also didn't want to just do it by myself because I feel it's most natural, sort of what we're doing here, just having a conversation. And I thought, well, the best thing to do would be to celebrate this idea of the wider orchestral family. So I began, the very first one I did was talking about, in fact, the Jennifer Higdon Violin Concerto, which we're premiering in New Zealand with our concertmaster, Amalia Hall. So I interviewed Amalia, and then I started thinking about, let's interview a board member, some musicians, and then a lot of our audience members. So I had a number of audience members, including the Chief Ombudsman of New Zealand, who's a chair sponsor of one of our players, Peter Boshier. He's a great supporter, and it's because we're in the capital, we have access to these sort of quite high public officials, and that was lots of fun. And then I said, well, let's now bring in the composers. And for, I'd say 8-9 years now, we've had a composer in residence program with the orchestra. We've had as many as 3 a year. Currently we just have one, John Stathis, and we've got a new scheme where he'll be our composer in residence for the next 3 years, though we'll have some other ones as well. So I have gotten through almost every single composer in residence that we featured over these past 8-9 years. And to date, I've done 23 or 24 of these videos.
Oh my gosh, I didn't realize that many.
Quite a few hours of work. So I enjoy the Zoom concerts and all that kind of stuff, but it's not really playing music. What you're really doing, because of latency issues, is playing to a click track. So it's not it's not really even hinting at what I think the essence of music is. Of course, we have some videos of prior performances that we put out there, but watching something like that, it's, as you said earlier, it's just not the same. So I thought the way to really increase the bonds and the appreciation for what I believe orchestra should be, which is sort of a centerpiece of a community of like-minded people that go to these concerts in a sense of a wonderment, interest, and community. The best way to do that would be to actually speak to them and to actually show that I respect what they do, and I'm humbled by the support that they show for the orchestra.
So you've been with the Vallejo Symphony since 2016. Can you kind of tell us about your first few seasons with them?
Right. Well, they went quite well because I was trying a lot of the same concepts. So thematic programming, and just conversing from the stage, trying to come into the community. There was a wonderful board member at the time, Jim Sotiros, who worked very closely with me going into school. So we did lots of school presentations. I'm keen to speak to community groups, and he introduced me to a lot of people. So there was that initial excitement of really trying to establish the orchestra in the community. When I first got to the orchestra, they were playing in a high school auditorium, which was substandard to me, and I was able to bring the orchestra into this wonderful hall in the downtown area called the Empress Theater, which was a 1911 converted movie theater. Smallish hall, but it has wonderful acoustics because it's the classic shoebox in shape. And yeah, so that was great. So immediately I was able to bolster the numbers by 60-70% over previous seasons, and we've been staying at that level until the pandemic, and that's been a bit of a challenge for us, of course.
When was your last concert with Vallejo?
My last concerts were in late February. I did, let me think now. I did Roy Harris's Third Symphony. I did Prokofiev's Second Violin Concerto, and I did Dvorak's Eighth Symphony. So that was, and we did 2 performances of that.
See, more than cookie cutter programming.
Well, yeah. So
I'm kidding.
So basically, that program is a series of concerts that examine Dvorak symphonies.
Yeah.
So we called it Great and Noble because, of course, there's the famous quote of Dvorak when asked, "What would you recommend for a school of American composition?" And being an intense nationalist, he said, "Everything an American composer requires can be found in the music of African Americans."
Yeah.
And so I thought, a great and noble school, he said. And of course, he was totally right, though not in the way he thought. Jazz, 12-bar blues. I mean, that, it's not the 12-tone row that has been the defining feature of the 20th century. It was the 12-bar blues. But he was absolutely prescient about this, and totally right. And America did develop a unique style. So I based it on that. So we did some of the symphonies, and then I thought, okay, well, we're talking about teaching and the American School of Composition. So I said, let's do some American symphonies. And of course, Roy Harris 3 is one of the great American symphonies. We also did Barber 1, and I was keen to do Ives 3, but that was curtailed. And then we did some.
You have a fan in Ives 3. Jamal's a gigantic fan of the third.
Yeah. Fabulous, the fabulous, and then we did a few mid-century European concerti, including, as I said, Prokofiev. No, sorry, Bartok. Prokofiev's Second Violin Concerto. Yeah, I'm thinking of all these pieces in my head. I'm sorry.
I know what's your situation right now with the symphony? They're shut down now. Do they have what are your plans kind of moving forward?
Okay. So, well, we're all furloughed. Uh, they had the initial board response was to postpone. So we had postponed to October, and then we were postponing to January. And last month I suggested to them that, look, because I had looked at modeling that had been published in the New York Times, not on Facebook, but in the New York Times, and which suggested that at the very earliest, things going according to plan, things might be opening up next summer. So I said, look, rather than just confuse the audience by continually postponing the concerts and changing, and I also changed next year's season as well to be a little bit smaller. All of these things were anathema to me. So I suggested, look, folks, the modeling is strongly suggesting that we are not going to get off the ground until summer. So how about we do a little season or a festival outside? So if there are concerns with the virus, we can socially distance in a big park, and play to 3,000-5,000 people or even more, and hit them with the next season's brochures and do the big sale from the podium, which I like to do. So in a way, it would solve a lot of issues. It would really increase the visibility of the orchestra,
Sure.
and it would also we'd have a captive audience, giving them these things in the hands, and there'd be the feel good feeling of they've just had a couple of beverages, listened to a great concert. It's like, oh yeah, I'll buy a couple of subscriptions, that kind of thing. So that's what we've gone with, and we found that by happenstance, there's a group that want to do an outdoor festival next summer. So we'll be doing back-to-back concerts, a Saturday and a Sunday, to 3,000 people each night. The first will be sort of a pop concert. So I'll do opera stuff. I'll do some hip hop as well, because there are some fantastic groups around the area, light classics, that kind of thing. And then the next concert, we'll do Beethoven 9.
That always works.
Yeah, of course. It's not rocket science, but Beethoven 9 is, of course, there's subtleties in Beethoven 9, don't get me wrong, but it is a work that is very well disposed to outdoor programming.
Exactly. And speaking of Beethoven 9, tell us a little bit about that, what you did a few months back with the Beethoven 9 and some youth.
Oh, yes. Yes, so this was the week before we got our first subscription concert away, which was Rachmaninoff Third Piano Concerto and Tchaikovsky's Manfred Symphony. The week before that, we did this thing called the Beethoven Bash, celebrating the 250th anniversary. And it was essentially the orchestra playing through the first movement of Beethoven's Fifth Symphony, and then a truncated version of the last movement of Beethoven 9, which did away with the four soloists. And we had, and I'm incredibly proud of this, we had 53 different community musical ensembles playing with us. So we had something like 500 people playing Beethoven 9, and it's there on YouTube, and it actually sounds really good. And I didn't change the tempi. I did my tempi, or should I say Beethoven's tempi, which is
Right.
is quite fleet of foot, and and I thought, at the time I thought, it doesn't sound that great, but everyone's having a great time, which they did. But then I listened to the YouTube clip and I thought, wow, it sounds pretty good. We were helped by the fact that the chorus was mainly the chorus that we work with, which is Orpheus Choir. And of course, next week, because of all those moments, we're doing Rachmaninoff's Bells with Orpheus.
Oh, that is a great piece.
It's a great piece. Yeah, so we're doing that and the Fauré Requiem. And then the week after that, we're doing a free community concert, and then we're doing another Rachmaninoff concert. So yeah, it was a brilliant experience. And once again, it's this idea of coming back after lockdown and getting together and making music together. And for an orchestra of Orchestra Wellington's budget size, to be able to reach out to the community in such a profound way is incredibly gratifying.
Well, with being, present COVID, post COVID, and just kind of the financial situation of many organizations, even looking at the Met furloughing their musicians for the whole season, what is your advice to a young conductor who is going to be trying to navigate towards the podium with what's happening now and just post COVID?
Investment banking, plastics. There's still plenty of opportunity to rape the environment for capital gain. I mean, none of these things could be discounted. But yeah, I think it's just steady on. This is a time, and this is certainly what I experienced was it's a time to stick to your knitting, continue studying. So we all get chances in this, in our lives, in our careers, and the people that are lucky are the ones that luckiest are the ones that have really done the good work. Some people may never have the opportunity to get in front of a great orchestra, or things might not click, but it's important to study, to learn the scores, to read up philosophy, the lives of the composers, putting things into context, thinking about matters of orchestral discipline, balance, intonation. How does one, consider conducting text? Consider how does one rehearse effectively? Think about programming. I mean, a lot of my time through lockdown was consumed not only with editing videos, but programming, working on studying. So when I was earlier in Sarasota, I had to come back and I had to go through the 2-week quarantine in Auckland. It was dull and fattening because you have nothing to do. I mean, I'm walking every day for an hour in circles, around a guarded perimeter. But basically, you're just eating their high carb food all day. That's all you're doing. But it wasn't boring for me because I had Manfred to deal with. I had and many other works. It's now, of course, I find myself in a position where I have a ridiculous amount of repertoire to get through in a very short amount of time. And luckily, I've done a lot of homework over the past few months, so it's not quite as daunting as it might otherwise have been. So that's my suggestion anyway.
Yeah, when I first started my position with the Southwest Florida Symphony, I essentially go into cover conduct mode, and thinking about should I hit them in the shin, whatever. But you went through that. But I think what was really helpful is I went from my positions before that, where I might have 4 major programs to conduct a year, so I had a tiny little pile of music, and then all of a sudden you go, oh, I got all my stuff to do, and I have to cover everything for the music director, and that was really good for me because it just got me kind of supercharged into I have to learn a lot more music a lot faster and be more efficient at it. And I think that's where times like this, like you're saying, Mark, what's great about this is it's a great time to dive in, because I think so many times as a conductor, it's a hard job to learn without just doing. But the biggest thing is study.
Yes, the biggest thing is study. And of course, the challenge for conductors is you can't practice conducting. You have to do conducting. And, there have been casualties along the way in the history of conducting.
I will say that when I look back at some of my first ones, I'm kind of like, I'm sorry, everybody, but I got better. I did. But, it is one of the things that's, how many jobs are there in the world where you have to learn at the expense of others? But, it doesn't, if you're really good at it, you learn really quickly, and, you learn so much from the musicianship of the musicians in front of you. And I know I was fortunate in the symphony where I met you. We had James Fawcett, who was the violist of the Philadelphia Orchestra. And so, having some of those players, and, they can kind of, you get through a rehearsal and it comes up, you go, have you thought about doing this and this and maybe do it in 2 years? And you go, oh, that's great. So, all of those things, I think, we learn so much from the people around us, but I think that's a great thing is right now, if we can study and learn more music. I know Jamal and I have both been delving into a lot more music that probably would have not got open because we were so busy doing all the concerts and programs we were already scheduled for. So I think it's an advantage. I wonder, that when you think about what's great with you working in New Zealand and the United States is you have these opposite seasons. So when you're busy in New Zealand, it's very calm in the United States and vice versa. So I know that you traveled back to here to see your family in June. So you went from New Zealand to the United States and then back. I wonder if you could just kind of tell us what was your experience like, because you were already traveling at the height of the pandemic, and maybe just compare and contrast our two different nations and how they've been responding.
Okay, that's interesting. It was, it was. I brought some N95 masks on my way to the airport. So I decided, because my father was fading quickly, on the day I was going to book flights, and it wasn't too bad to get over to the States. But I'll never forget getting off the plane in LA and immediately putting my mask on, because masks were everywhere. And then just the absolute desolation. And in fact, in Auckland, also the international airport, total desolation. Nothing was open, whereas the domestic airports in New Zealand were rather crowded. So and then of course it was quite a circuitous route to get to Sarasota. I went LA to Phoenix to Miami to Tampa, and then my sister picked my brother and I up in Tampa. And it was kind of the same story all the way through. The socially distanced planes were interesting. The fact that you were required to wear masks on the planes was something that I wasn't used to. Now that's come to New Zealand now because of this minor outbreak that happened last month. So I didn't necessarily know what to expect. I knew that things were raging, especially in Florida, but I have to say I was impressed with the level of social distancing that I saw in Sarasota, and the almost universal use of masks in public spaces. Not everywhere, but in general, more people than not were doing that. And my brother, sister, and I, we went to Longboat Key and went to the beach, and that was great. Also, I mean, there were thousands of people on the beach, but everyone kept respectful distances from each other. So I thought it was very, very good. But so my experience was that people were taking it very, very seriously in the States, and I wasn't too concerned about my own health, my own safety.
It's interesting now. Since that time, we had another flare up, kind of pretty much right after you left. That was
Right.
pretty bad, and so now, like the city of Sarasota has a mandated mask, and so we've already seen even more diligence than before. But I think like everything, I think we all get a little tired and we kind of let our guard down. But it's interesting when you think of Florida. We've got just in Florida, thousands of new cases every day. But in New Zealand, you might have 5 cases total or 0. So there's a huge difference between not only what the pandemic's doing, but what each of our governments are doing to manage that as best. So I kind of wonder what's your perspective, because you've been in both places.
Okay. Well, look, okay, there are a couple of things. I mean, it speaks to the size of the places. Well, let's pull it back. New Zealand's first case was in mid-February, and but so we were probably 6 weeks behind the States in terms of the origins of the pandemic coming in. And whilst Gavin Newsom went into their high-level lockdown 6 days before us, we were probably 5 weeks ahead of California in doing it. And then there was the nature of our lockdown, which literally was confined to quarters. You could go out to the supermarket for medical help or to get petrol, but we were strongly advised, if you want, and of course you could go outside to exercise, but we were strongly advised to stay within your general neighborhood when going outside of the house. The idea was you would stay in your bubble and not not have any interaction face to face with anyone outside your bubble. And by and large, that's what happened. The initial this major lockdown, which is totally different than was happening in California, because there were, for instance, you could get takeaways at restaurants. That was not an option in New Zealand. So it was very strict. But the way it was presented to us was it was for the common good. At the time, we thought that it was a 2-week gestation period for the virus. So the initial level 4 was 4 weeks long, and then they extended another week, and then we went to level 3 for a couple of days, and then we went to level 2. And we saw things rise for about 2.5 weeks and then steadily fall. And by the time we got into level 2, we were maybe looking at below 5 a day. And then, as I said, we had 100 days without any community transmission until this flare up. So I think that's a big difference between the two countries, in that we went earlier, and it's nothing about us doing that. It was just observing the larger countries that had more movement between them. They were getting hit harder. So New Zealand was in a very privileged position to be able to learn from others' misfortune. And the modeling showed that had we not acted when we did, our medical systems could have gone the way of New York and Italy and been overrun, outside.
Well, obviously, I mean, your leader did a good job of handling the situation from a national level, but I mean, here it seems, the pandemic has really been a two-party fight constantly. Like, what have the politics been like there in terms of the pandemic?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, so we're a parliamentary system. It's mixed member proportional, though. So I don't want to go too far into it. It's a great system. We have 2 votes, much like Germany. We vote for our local MP, a minister of parliament, and then we do a party vote. And so it's kind of like you vote. The party vote gives the overall makeup of parliament, and so there'll be some list MPs who don't stand for an electorate, but if the party gets 40% of the vote, they're entitled to that many MPs. So basically, Labour is in a coalition government, and so they're able to basically do what they want because they have the numbers on their side. So there are not quite as many checks and balances as there are in the States. And that obviously was an advantage. Likewise, we're one country. We don't have lots of provinces or states like they do in Australia or in America, with individual rules. So it was unambiguous and very, very clear. In terms of politics, there is a little bit of that. Now, so we have a left of center government. Of course, our right of center government by American standards is like Bernie Sanders, okay? So the right, the national government, in opposition, basically all you're doing is complaining all the time. So it's been like, oh, we went first. They were sending mixed messages. First, it was like, oh, we should have gone in lockdown well before this, or lockdown's too strict, or we should be opening up business, this kind of stuff. And in fact, this criticism reaches a fevered pitch, and then the government does respond. So when we had our level 4 extended an extra week, the opposition was crying, foul left, right, and center, and of course the pollsters on Labour side, the left side, did see that the sentiment of the community was that yes, we're hurting here. We really need to open up the businesses. So we moved to level 3 and then level 2, and that just amped up the commerce of the place.
It seems to me that for our situation, the United States is such an immense country, and I kind of think about since we have a lot of friends in Europe. Europe is also a little bit like our states, and since we have a lot of different countries in Europe, and they all have a little bit different take, a little different idea, but yet we're all connected, land-wise. And so I think it took the European Union too a while to figure out how do we kind of find some sort of general consensus, because every country affects the other country, and I think that's where we are with states. There's each state is kind of doing their own thing, but yet there's not an overarching sort of philosophy that brings us all together.
Well, and that is the ultimate difference between the two places. And now Australia is just coming out of a really bad second wave. So Australia was arguably doing better than New Zealand did, and the toughest lockdown they did was probably equivalent to our level 3, or what Gavin Newsom did in California in the middle of March. And yet they were able to bring their numbers down to essentially 0 for a while. And then, similar to New Zealand, something got through the safety net of quarantine, and Melbourne had this immense outbreak, and they still have, I think, 15 people dying a day. So it's nothing like America, but by Australian standards, it is devastating for them. It's slowly getting under control. So yes, there are lots of different ways about doing this. I personally think that what Australia and New Zealand did, and Taiwan and places like this, Korea, China, remember locking down Wuhan in late January, early February. It was extraordinary that they could do that. But of course, it's the nature of how their government is set up. In some ways, that's what it takes. So it seemed to me that the lockdown that New Zealand had to go through initially to beat the virus in its first stage was really tough, but it was sold to us in such a way that it made sense. They wanted to go through 2 cycles of the virus's transmission to get rid of it, and that's what the experts said, and the modeling suggested would beat it, and it did. So it was quite eerie at the time, because we would, my wife and I, we like to run, we like to bike, so we take our mountain bikes out, and there was no one on the roads anywhere. It was just a ghost country, really. Everyone was at home watching Netflix and reading fake news on Facebook.
Well,
I know.
they have, there sounds like there's a great deal more of trust in the government there from its people.
Yeah, there is. I mean, we've got an election in, I think, 3 weeks, maybe 3 weeks tomorrow, I think. And it's looking like Labour is like, well, Labour's a shoo-in to be reelected, but it's quite possible they'll be able to govern without a coalition, which I'm what I'm hoping for, because I don't want them to go into coalition with the Greens necessarily, because that would lurch them a little bit, maybe too far to the left. It would just create an opening. But at the moment, Jacinda Ardern and the rest of the people dealing with this crisis have done an exemplary job. And I mean, on that topic, Jacinda Ardern has proven herself extraordinarily capable in emergencies. You look at the mosque tragedy of a year ago March, how she reacted totally against how one would expect a politician to react, reacting with total empathy and understanding and sympathy, rather than what one might expect Trump to deal with. And then there was the White Island disaster where people died because of a volcano explosion. She's really good in crises, and her handling of this COVID pandemic has been nothing short of textbook response, in my view.
Well, I think what's great is I think you guys are an inspiration to us, because we're striving for getting things under control, and I think to talk to a friend and a conductor who's making music and making it at high levels with an audience is kind of what we need to hear, because I think it's been a long time since we've been on the podium, and to hear and see all the things you're doing is really, it's great for our spirit.
Yeah. Well, it's going to happen. It's going to happen in the States also. It absolutely will. I mean, I think the more people wear masks, don't let down your guard. And the fact is, there will be vaccines coming out, in a matter of months now. So
I think for our viewers, it's a matter of just. I know we talked about it a little bit. I think there will be this renaissance. I think you guys are at the forefront of that, but there'll be a renaissance because I think people now have a deeper understanding of how important music and the arts are in their lives and how important it is to experience that with another human being and to share that musical experience.
yeah, I couldn't say it better, Joe.
All right. Well, I tell you, I have to thank you for being part of this. We've had a good time today, and it's great having you here to share your perspective and just to kind of catch up because we haven't chatted in what feels like way too long.
Well, it's great to meet
Joe.
you.
And Jamal, great to meet you.
Yes.
Well, we want to thank Conductor Marc Taddei for taking time out of his busy concert week and to join us in an enlightening conversation about music and making music during this challenging time. So, Marc, once again, thanks. Our deepest thanks to you for being part of our conversation today.
Well, thanks for having me, Joe, and thanks, Jamal.
Thank you. And we want to thank you all for joining us in this conversation. And please feel free to give to Key Chorale as we continue to work hard of bringing program to you during this COVID-19 time. It is so great to connect with all of you every other Friday. And remember, if you are catching us for the first time, and this is the first time we've ever done a music morning coffee maestro via being in separate places and another country, you can always check out our other episodes on our YouTube channel anytime after the premiere. And if you enjoy these conversations, please help us spread the word and let your friends know about morning coffee.
There we go. It's morning coffee and maestros and maestro. Right? We are excited about our next time on Morning Coffee.
And maestros.
I'll kind of stop there. Our topic will be conductor, magician, or musician. Magicians often wear a tux, so do maestros. The magician wields a magic wand while the conductor waves his or her magical baton. While conductors do occasionally pull a rabbit out of our hats during a concert week, it is really the musicianship and the musician who creates the magic.
What are the skills that make a great conductor great? How does one go from merely beating time to shaping and inspiring interpretation? What are the steps we take from study to rehearsal to performance to the standing ovation? And you can be part of the conversation. Ask us your burning questions in our Ask the Maestro segment. And you can even learn why I think Higdon can conduct himself.
See, he's totally wrong in that, but we'll explore all of this and more as we look at the role of conductors, discuss the difference between fakers and makers, and answer your questions about music and the art of conducting next time on Morning Coffee
and Maestros.
And I think we have to, the good thing about this episode, Jamal, is you can say